and gentlemen, the Brit Pack is back. Simon Head and Michael Sandhu bringing you all things MMA with a distinctly British flavour. We've had 3 long, quiet weeks without a live UFC show, but we are back this coming weekend with the Ultimate Fighter Latin America finale. Not a blockbuster card, I'll be honest with you, but it does feature a couple of interesting matchups. Most notably the event between RDA and Tony Ferguson. We will talk about that on this week's show as we get back into the swing of things. We'll also talk about UFC 205. There are other fights on this card beside Alvarez versus McGregor, so we will talk about a few of those. And UFC 206, what's going on with that fight card? Does it need a little bit of British input? Could Michael Bisping find himself on that fight card? We will talk about that. We will then answer your questions, and then we will get the hell out of here for another week. Sandhu, my man, how are you?
I'm very well, Simon. Very well. I feel like I've got energy. I think the last couple of weeks I've been battling a bit of sickness, a bit of illness and stuff like that. But I feel 100. Maybe it's been the 3 weeks of no UFC events. Finally getting some rest, some well-deserved rest over the weekends. But I feel fantastic. I'm really, really excited. This time next week I'll be in New York. I think you'll be in New York this time next week as well, right? When do you get there?
I get there Monday afternoon, actually.
Monday afternoon?
Yeah.
So this time next week we'll both be in New York. I'll get there on Saturday. I'm going out a little bit early. I have some family that I'm fortunately enough able to stay with for my duration there for the week, and I'm buzzing. I think the absence of UFC events has started to kind of get that kind of energy and that kind of anticipation going, and I think we've got a nice little kind of almost like a teaser to the real main event when it comes to overall cards next weekend with the RDA versus Ferguson fight this weekend. But yeah, I can't wait. It's going to be fantastic, and I'm sure we're going to get into it a lot later on. But yeah, always good to be back on the old Skype machine with you and talk some MMA for a while.
Good stuff. The one bad thing about New York I've discovered during my extensive research is there are no Nando's in New York City. I'm very disappointed.
How are we going to survive, mate? How are we going to survive?
2 words for you: dollar pizza. That's all I'm saying. You can. There are websites dedicated to this. You just rock up, slice of pizza, $1. That suits me fine. I'll have dollar pizza all day long. That will keep me going. I'll be walking around with indigestion for the entire week. But I'll be a happy man. It'll be good fun. But before then, as you say, we've got a little bit of an hors d'oeuvre. We've got a little bit of a taster, a bit of a teaser coming up this weekend. It is the Tough Latin America finale. I'm gonna hold my hands up and admit I have not watched Tough Latin America 3.
I am shocked.
Yeah, I know. I'm failing in my job. I'm sorry. But what we do have at the top of that card is a very, very important fight for the UFC lightweight division. Rafael dos Anjos, former UFC lightweight champion, and I think I saw a stat today. I think it's a 3rd or 4th all time for wins in the lightweight division. He's got 14 career wins at 155 pounds. He's been around for ages. I remember when he first came onto the scene, and he looked a very good, tough, compact fighter. I'll admit I never thought he'd make it to world championship level. But he's certainly done that and proved himself to be an elite operator at 155. He obviously got beat by Eddie Alvarez in Vegas. He fights Tony Ferguson, who's one of these rising contenders who no one, I think, really wants to fight the guy. He's just such a difficult stylistic matchup for pretty much anyone in that lightweight division. Will the winner of this, and I guess this is the crux of it all, we know it's a big contender fight. Dos Anjos is a former champion. Ferguson is on, I think, one of the longest win streaks in the division. Does the winner of this get a title shot? Bearing in mind Khabib is fighting Michael Johnson at 205. And obviously we could have rematch implications. Nate Diaz might come into the equation if McGregor wins. What happens to the winner of this fight?
I really don't know, Side. That is the $1 million question. I suppose in a perfect world, the winner of this fight would and should get a title shot. But as you know, Simon, in MMA and especially in the world of the UFC, we do not live in a perfect world. We live in a far from perfect world. And what's fascinating about the next couple of weekends is we've got RDA and Tony Ferguson this Saturday night. And then the following Saturday night, we've got another big fight in the lightweight division with Michael Johnson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. And Khabib's come out and said, considering how he was almost treated like a pawn in that whole situation of McGregor and Alvarez getting booked, if he wins and doesn't get the next crack at the lightweight champion, he's on his bike. He's going to call it a day. He's going to just move on and perhaps retire from the sport, which would be incredible when you think about his record: 20 plus fights, undefeated. I don't know. I mean, I think if Khabib wins, then he trumps RDA and Ferguson. But then you look at Ferguson, and he's running this 8-fight win streak. And I think it was my colleague Mike Bond. I'm trying to think who else it was, but he sent out a tweet earlier this week where it's Tony Ferguson and one other fighter, and perhaps you can remember, but there's 2 fighters that have got over 8 wins and never received a title shot in the 23-year history of the UFC, which is just incredible considering how other fighters have been able to get a crack at a championship fight. So let's see how things shape out. I think if next weekend, if Michael Johnson wins, then the winner of this weekend's fight has definitely got a better chance of getting a title shot. But then, as you said, it all depends on what happens between McGregor and Alvarez. If McGregor wins, is it the Alvarez rematch? Is it, Nate Diaz part 3? There's just so many, variables in the air, which is what makes, the next couple of weekends just so fascinating and interesting in terms of what storylines are going to develop. But everything is going to be hinging on what happens in New York in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, and I in no way am I advocating for more world titles in a division, but you can see how in the world of boxing the multiple world championship thing works to people's benefit, because you don't have these worthy contenders not getting a shot at a championship because there's God knows how many world championships knocking around. If you can't fight for the WBC, you can probably get on and fight for the IBF or the IBO or the IBA or the WBO or the WBA or the WBF or the WBU. All these ridiculous alphabet boxing world titles. What it means is people get chances to fight for world championships. So, whereas what you've got with the UFC, you got one title, and that's how I think that's how it should be. You have one champion, an undisputed champion. The problem that you have is the logjam that you have underneath once you start playing around with things. And the UFC has been playing around with stuff, particularly when it comes to Conor. And the problem now is things need to be settled back down again, because we can't make this a showbiz attraction just completely, because it's gonna piss off people like Khabib, who is he like 22-0 or something stupid like that. And he's gone through people like a hot knife through butter. And if he wins, and he wins as dominantly as he has done in the past, he has to get the next title shot. And even if Nate Diaz turns up and says, well, I'm ready for that trilogy fight now, McGregor, and McGregor says, yes, let's have that trilogy fight, the UFC needs to put their foot down and say, no. If Conor McGregor is the lightweight champion, and there is a big question mark over whether he will be or not, Eddie Alvarez has got plenty to say about that. But if Khabib wins the fight, whoever is the world champion should be not asked to fight against Khabib, should be told to fight against Khabib. And if you don't, then you lose your belt. That's how it has to be. And they need to strengthen the ranking system. It needs to mean more. And you need to enforce the ranking system. Otherwise, what's the point in having it? And you've got this weird situation coming up where potentially Khabib could win the fight, could absolutely take Michael Johnson to the cleaners, and still not fight for the UFC lightweight title until the second half of 2017, which would be a travesty. So I think it's a difficult one. I think if Khabib wins, he's got to be number 1 in the queue. But I think the winner of this particular fight, RDA versus Ferguson, has got to be number 2. Just because, the body of work of both guys, RDA, former champion, Ferguson, on that ridiculous 8-fight win streak. The other person, I think, and I haven't been on and checked his tweet, might be Max Holloway. I don't know if it might be Max Holloway. He's had a lot of wins at featherweight.
You're right, so Simon.
It might be him.
That's the one. Yeah, I was trying to figure out who else it was. You're bang on the money there. It is Max Holloway. Yeah.
Yeah, and they're both kind of impacted by the same guy, aren't they? It's it's Conor McGregor is the fly in the ointment for two weight classes right now, and I would just like him to settle down and say, right, I'm going to fight in this division. I spoke to Mark Diacasi today, and I said, what division did you think he should fight in? And he said, he's a lightweight. He should fight as a lightweight and just find his place in that lightweight division. If he's a champion, great. But he also said he should give up the 145 belt, which I also agree with. But we will see what happens at UFC 205 when it comes to belts and all the rest of it. But RDA versus Ferguson. Let's get a prediction off you, Mr. Sandhu. I've been thinking about this, and it's going to be... It's a tough one to pick. But tougher to pick than a broken nose, as someone once told me. But it's
very, very graphic there, Si. Thanks very much for that one.
That's all good, mate. I'm here. I'm nothing if not disappointingly lame when it comes to the pun. But yeah, who's your money on? I'll give you my last £10. Where'd you put it?
Well,
RDA or Ferguson?
I think I'm leaning a little bit more towards Ferguson. I just think that he's been, excellent on this 8-fight win streak. He looks better every time he's out. But at the same time, it's not just, his performances and where he's at as a fighter now that kind of, allow me to favour him a little bit more. It's what RDA's done recently. He hasn't looked at his best. Actually, just this past week, Rafael Cordero gave an interview to Combache. I never know which one it is. Is it Globo? Is it Combache? They're both one and the same, basically, in Brazil, which is like the big mainstream UFC/MMA media outlet in Brazil. So they had an interview with Rafael Cordero where he revealed that Rafael dos Anjos had recently left King's MMA. So now he's left and he's going to go set up his own gym. From what I gather, he'll still spend a little bit of time at King's MMA, but his whole move away from that gym is a bit of a red flag for me, because I think, for the most part, guys like him and Fabricio Verdum have just gone on from strength to strength with their performances in the octagon. So to do that kind of shift away and move away during this kind of like transitional period where he's got a massive fight coming up against a streaking Tony Ferguson, I'm not too sure if that's the right move or not. And I think there might be some lingering, mental fatigue from having been injured and losing out on that Conor McGregor big payday. I don't know. I think there's a lot of baggage there with Rafael dos Anjos at the moment. And with Ferguson, he just looks super confident. Every interview he's giving, he can't wait to get in there and prove himself and show what he's worth, taking on all comers. So yeah, I'm picking Tony Ferguson on this one.
Yeah, I've been back and forth on this. I sort of look at Rafael dos Anjos. He's battle tested. He's been in there with the best guys in the world. He's held the championship. He's won a lot of fights in the UFC, and he's tough. He's just a tough individual. But he got beat up by Eddie Alvarez, and I'm wondering what that would have done to him. In much the same way he got beat up by Jeremy Stevens as well. But particularly this fight, he was basically knocked out standing, wasn't he? He wasn't actually decked as such. He was stopped while still standing up against the cage, but he was getting blasted. So you've got that side of it, and you got, as you say, Tony Ferguson is a man in form. I don't think we know where Tony Ferguson's ceiling is yet. I don't think we've seen him tested to breaking point yet. When you get these title fights, and like Jones versus Gustafsson is probably a great example of this. Two guys who just pushed themselves to the absolute limit. Rory McDonald versus Robbie Lawler is another one that springs to mind. Two guys who just absolutely laid everything on the line. I think Tony Ferguson is waiting for a fight like that. This could be that fight, because Dos Anjos is a tough guy. He's going to come in super motivated for this. There are question marks over his camp. I totally agree with you. I think, and I think it's very valid as well. But I sort of look at the fights and I think if they're both at 100%, I think I would lean towards RDA just a little bit, because he's seasoned and he's just got that rock solid exterior that I think, as I say, he's battle tested. Whereas I think right now I look at it, I think Ferguson's on the up and up. I think he's got more ways to win a fight. I just think he seems to be the sort of the coming man right now, and it'd be a tough pick. It's sort of like 51-49 almost, and I'm just siding with Tony Ferguson. But I think it's going to be a great fight, and I think it might last a little way. I think it might go into the third or fourth round. I think we're going to see I think we're going to be talking about this as one of the best fights of the year. So
I agree. Yeah, 100%. I mean, Tony Ferguson, I think, if I'm not mistaken, this is his second back-to-back main event slot. I believe, if I can remember correctly, I'm going to look it up now as we're kind of having this conversation. But he fought on that Sioux Falls card, just following UFC 200, against Lando Venato, who I believe came into the situation on short notice there, and actually no, it wasn't the main event. That was McDonald vs Lineker, but that was a fight where Tony Ferguson was going to push to the limit, and his chin was definitely tested, and he was dropped, he was rocked, but he came through. He came through that, and maybe that's a good thing for him, because he can certainly get into a firefight with RDA, and just to know that you've got the chin at this stage of his career to probably withstand a bit of abuse there on the face. That's never a bad thing.
Yeah, and if you go on YouTube, the UFC like to put free fights up on YouTube to promote the main event guys as they're heading into their fights. They've put up the Tony Ferguson Edson Barboza fight from last year. I was octagon side for that fight, and my abiding memory of that fight were two things. Number one was the noise that was just the sound of Edson Barboza's kicks on Tony Ferguson. It was like a man being hit with a baseball bat. Is the best. I've never seen a man like in person being hit by a baseball bat, but I can imagine that's what it would have sounded like. Do you know what I mean? It was hard.
So Simon, why are you using baseball bat as an analogy? If anything, you should be saying it's like a man getting hit by a cricket bat.
Oh yeah, it's a Brit pack, isn't it? Sorry, yeah. It's like a man being hit with a cricket bat, and and it was the other thing about it was Ferguson just completely poker faced the whole thing. He was getting blasted with those kicks, kicks to the leg, kicks to the body, and he wasn't flinching at all. And he was putting himself in harm's way to try and get the fight to the floor. He was trying rolling leg locks and all sorts of stuff. And at times, Barboza was lighting him up, especially with his kicks. And he didn't care. He was just walking through it, taking, no doubt, a hell of a lot of damage on the way in. But he won the fight. Once he got where he wanted to be, he locked up the choke, finished him off. Darce choke, I think it was. But if you get the chance, get back onto YouTube, watch that fight. Watch the amount of punishment that Barboza gave him. It wasn't one-way street by any stretch. Ferguson was dishing out a bit of his own. But in the striking stakes, he was getting beat up by Barboza. And he knew he needed to fight on the floor. He eventually got the fight on the floor, and he won the fight. There was an illegal up kick, which also helped him a little bit. But I don't think that was what won in the fight. So, we'll give him a pass on that one. But yeah, I think he's a tough guy. And I think he needs a marquee win. And I think to beat RDA in a main event on Fox Sports rather, would be sort of the start of it for him. And I think then he can start shouting for, if not a title shot, then certainly a title eliminator, if this isn't already one. So it's going to be an interesting one. On that fight card as well, Sandhu, we've obviously got the tough Latin America finale fight that we've all been waiting for, Martin Bravo versus Claudio Puelles. But aside from that, because we could be here all day talking about that one, Diego Sanchez is taking on Marcin Held. That's an interesting fight. But the one I really want to ask you about is Ricardo Lamas versus Charles Oliveira in the featherweight division. Yes. Two good guys who are just a gnats below championship level. But they'd only need a couple of wins to find themselves in contention. Again, it's the featherweight logjam, all the rest of it. But we've got two very, very tough guys here. Both good with their hands standing up, both good on the mat. What's your take on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I feel for Lamas a little bit here because he was supposed to fight BJ Penn in a main event slot in the Philippines, which for all intents and purposes would have been, I think, a walk in the park for him, especially where BJ Penn is at this stage of his career. And obviously a main event slot, it's a nice little platform for any fighter to kind of use that as a springboard to go on to bigger and better things. Here, they've had to shuffle things around a little bit because they cancelled that, Philippines card, and they've stuck Lamas and Oliveira on the main card, which is it's a six fight main card though, which is on Fox Sports, which means it's gonna be a long night for us. But but look, it's a really good fight. It's definitely a way more competitive fight, and I think both Lamas and Oliveira, although they're kind of in the upper echelon, of that featherweight division, they're both 1 and 2 in their last 3. They both definitely need a win here, because I think for the loser, it's not exactly loser leaves town, but you're definitely going to start to drop off quite a bit. But if I'm going to pick one or the other, I think I might just lean towards Lamas a little bit here. I think he was highly motivated in training for that BJ Penn fight, just because it was a main event slot, and he just probably had to take the gas off a little bit before ramping things up again for this Charles Oliveira fight. So I'm looking forward to the fight. I think it'll be a fun fight, and I'm picking Lamas to win that one.
Yeah, I'm going to be really boring and agree with you. I think I side with I like Charles Oliveira, but I just think Lamas can hurt him standing up. I just think Lamas is a much more powerful guy. I think he can use his wrestling skills to keep Oliveira on his feet, and I think Lamas beats him up on the feet. So, his nickname is the Bully, and I think that's what's going to happen. I think he's going to bully Charles Oliveira. He needs to be careful he doesn't walk into anything or shoot into a guillotine or anything like that. As long as he fights smart, I think he wins the fight. And I wouldn't be surprised if he stopped him. I think he's got it in him to get a stoppage win. And if he does that, then he's obviously back in the conversation again. So looking forward to that one. We've got a lightweight fight, Beneil Dariush, one of the best submission guys at 155 against Rashid Magomedov. And we've got the debut of Alexa Grasso taking on Heather Jo Clark, opening the main card at strawweight. Just running down the rest of the card. Henry Briones was obviously going to fight Brad Pickett once upon a time. In fact, twice upon a time, and neither time it happened. He's in action. Eric Perez, El Goito, he's in action against Felipe Aranches. And the featured fight pass prelim is Smiling Sam Alvey against Alex Nicholson. You got much more you want to say about this fight card? It's not one that's gonna. If anyone who's going to stay up and watch this through gets extra points for this, because it's not packed with star power. There's still a TBA on the card. Michael Beltran doesn't have an opponent yet. I assume that's a tough winner is going to go in there. I don't know, but yeah, we aren't packed with too much star power there, are we?
No, but the one guy I think people should be keeping an eye on here is Marcin Held, who used to fight for Bellator for quite some time. Only really lost to Will Brooks in the last kind of, like, say, 3 years or so. He's a veteran of the sport. He's been in well over 20 fights, and he's coming in here, in a situation where he could probably rise up the ranks quite quickly, and getting a win over a name value opponent like Diego Sanchez, on a main card slot isn't going to do anything bad for you. And considering where Diego Sanchez is in at the moment in his career, I think that would be I think it's going to be a pretty easy win there for Marcin Held. I mean, Diego Sanchez, he's won 4 or 3 of his last 7, which included that ridiculous decision against Ross Pearson. But so yeah, Marcin Held, keep an eye on him. For people that have perhaps only been paying to the UFC product who may not know him, he is a very, very talented fighter who I expect to do some really big things in the UFC now. Excellent shout.
That is the Ultimate Fighter finale. That is this Saturday night live on BT Sport. The main card will be live on BT Sport. The TV prelims will be shared between BT Sport and UFC Fight Pass, and obviously the UFC Fight Pass prelims, surprise, will be exclusive on UFC Fight Pass. That is this Saturday. If we fast forward an extra week, that takes us to New York City, the Big Apple, Madison Square Garden, biggest fights in UFC history, blah, 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 blah. You've heard it all before. Now, we've got 3 World Championship fights on this card, Sandhu. We've spoken about these. Everyone has spoken about these. I don't think we need to speak about these. We've already covered it. So let's take a look at the rest of the card, because we've just talked about a fight card that doesn't have a lot of star power on it. You could argue that, with maybe one or two exceptions, any of the fights on this card could easily be main eventing or co-main eventing this weekend's card. This is how strong these fights are. Weidman Romero, Gastelum Cerrone, Tate Pennington on the main card, Edgar Stevens, Nurmagomedov Johnson, Evans Kennedy, Luque Mohammed on TV prelims on Fox and on BT Sport here in the UK, and the Fight Pass prelims, Jim Miller, Thiago Alves, Rafael Natal, Tim Boach, and Liz Carmouche, Katlyn Chookagian. And it's an interesting thing, just very quickly on Liz Carmouche. She's getting historic things in her fighting CV.
Yeah.
You know, she was involved in the first ever women's fight in the UFC when she fought Ronda Rousey. Now she's going to be the first UFC fight at Madison Square Garden. That's quite a feather.
The curtain jerker, if you will.
A feather in the cap. Carmouche and Chookagian. Whoever wins that fight can lay claim to be the first winner of a UFC fight at the iconic Madison Square Garden. And that's kind of a cool thing. Pick out a couple of these fights for us, Sandhu, and let us know a little bit about your thoughts heading into this, because you could almost close your eyes and just pluck fights out of a hat and dish out a load of reasons why people should be interested in these, because there's so many good fights on this card.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we spoke about it, in the first segment of the show today. Khabib Nurmagomedov, Michael Johnson, just a huge, massive fight. And from what I'm led to believe, New York has a pretty big Russian community, so it'll be interesting to see if Khabib gets quite a good reception there with fans with that kind of Russian background. I'm expecting Michael Johnson to come out like a man possessed in this fight, knowing that this is a huge opportunity to be the first man to give Khabib Nurmagomedov his first ever professional loss. That's a massive feather in your cap. If you can do that, that puts you right at the top of the list. And a nice promo to finish the night off, and then you're right in the business there in trying to get a title shot. Rashad Evans, Tim Kennedy, fascinating fight. I mean, Rashad Evans is making his middleweight debut. He's kind of teased about doing it in the past. At one point, a few years back, there was the potential of him dropping down to fight then champion Anderson Silva, but that never materialized. And I think at the time, even when I looked at his body type, I thought maybe he's just carrying way too much, muscle mass, or perhaps it was just too much water weight that he carried. I don't know, but he's giving it a go. But man, he's got a tough a middleweight debut against Tim Kennedy, and I don't know if you follow. I'm sure you do, Simon. But for those of you who perhaps don't, take a look at Tim Kennedy's social media, especially his Instagram. This guy looks absolutely ripped for a guy that's 37, and he's being tested by USADA randomly and at a competition. So hopefully everything's on the up and up. But for someone that still trains and is part of the military, hasn't fought in the UFC in over 2 years, he looks in phenomenal condition. He said he'd only come back for a big fight. This is a huge fight for him. The last time we saw him in action was against Yoel Romero when we had Stoolgate go on. But yeah, I mean that's just 2 out of thin air that I can pick that are just fascinating storylines. And that's just on the preliminary Fox Sports 1 card. Over to you, Si. You give me a couple.
Well, on the topic of Tim Kennedy, actually, I did a story on him today. He did a very good interview with our good friends in Australia, Submission Radio. Do check them out if you're online. They're good lads. And Tim Kennedy basically said everyone's falling over themselves to fight Michael Bisping because, according to Kennedy, Bisping is the easiest fight in the division. So, like the blue touch paper, retire to a safe distance. I'm sure Bisping will have something to say about that in due course. But yeah, Kennedy, where they say this guy, this guy's tough, this guy's a killer. Tim Kennedy is tough, and he is actually a killer. In real life. In real life, That's his day job. He's an army sniper, right? So he has no fears whatsoever stepping into the octagon, because this is just playtime for him. And against Rashad Evans, I think we're going to be in for a very, very interesting matchup. Both guys have had lengthy layoffs. I mean, Evans came back more recently, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see who comes out of that one on top. I want to talk about Miesha Tate, Raquel Pennington. That's going to open up the main card. I think that's a bit of a crossroads fight for both women in some ways. You look at Raquel Pennington, she's on the up and up. She's always had the reputation of being a very scrappy, very durable, dogged sort of competitor. And now she's getting the wins that matter in her career. And now she's got the opportunity to beat a marquee name. If she can get past Miesha Tate, then she's launched herself straight into contender territory. So this is a huge fight for her. And I'm looking forward to seeing how she goes. I think stylistically, her versus Miesha could even steal the show. I think it could be a really exciting back and forth contest. Miesha obviously suffered that crushing defeat at the hands of Amanda Nunes at UFC 200. You know, she got beat up on the feet, eventually got choked by Nunes, and obviously lost the title at the first time of asking as well. She actually spent some time away. Her and Brian Caraway, her boyfriend, head coach, and top bantamweight contender in the UFC. They both went up to Canada, went to Ontario on an adventure sports weekend, and just completely got away from it all. And she seems to come back completely revitalized, and I think that's what we need. I think she seemed very, very tired when heading into UFC 200, and there were issues with her weight cut. I remember that week. I think she made weight literally with seconds to spare. So I think if I could keep away from any dramas during fight week, she's in quite a good place mentally right now, and I think she's going to come in very, very fired up to make a statement against Raquel Pennington. So I'm really looking forward to that fight. But the one that I also very, very quickly just want to mention, Vicente Luque has stepped in on short notice, or shortish notice, to take on Bilal Muhammad. Muhammad was going to fight Lyman Good, the former Bellator champion, I think he was for a while. And Lyman Good has fallen foul of the USADA testing. He's protested his innocence and said, you know, he hasn't taken anything. That's obviously going to go through its due process, but he's off the card. So Vicente Luque has stepped in. Find the Black Zillions Instagram account and find the footage of Vicente Luque sparring. I call it sparring. Basically having an all-out fight in the ring with no headgear. I don't know who. I'm not sure who he was sparring with, but they were beating seven shades out of each other, Sandhu. I was looking at it going, that's career-shortening stuff. I don't know. I mean, I know it's the old shoot-the-box sort of ethos, you know, iron sharpening iron and all that sort of stuff. But it was pretty tough stuff. So he's coming. He's going to be ready. So I'm looking forward to that. I think that'll be a fun fight as well. But the one fight that excites me more than any other, and it's a bit of an easy pick because it's the highest fight that isn't a championship fight, is that Chris Weidman Yoel Romero fight. Both wrestlers, both heavy-handed, both prodigious athletes, and it's going to be a case of, has one of them, you know, Romero is an Olympic medalist wrestler. He's a world champion gold medalist in wrestling. Weidman was a strong collegiate wrestler, but he didn't wrestle at an amateur level, at the level that Yoel Romero competed at. Is Weidman's wrestling good enough to stifle Romero? If it is, it might come down to the gas tank, and if it does, I think Weidman wins the fight. If he can't keep Romero off him, then Weidman could find himself getting blasted. So it's a fascinating contest. I think it's on a knife edge, and it's going to all hinge on whether Weidman can stifle Romero's superior on paper wrestling game. It's going to be a cracking matchup. The winner of that, I think, if Chris Weidman wins, I think he gets the next title shot. I think. Yeah,
I agree. But a point on the gas tank, because I'm of the same opinion. I think the longer the fight goes, it favors Weidman. But then I look at Romero's record, and would it surprise you if I told you that his last 6 wins have all come in the third round of the fight?
But have you seen the state of him in the third round of those fights?
Yes.
He's blowing out of his backside by the time he gets to the middle of the third.
He certainly is.
But
he does it. He does it. He somehow manages to pull off these wins.
He's doing it. He's doing it
late in the fight. He's doing it. I don't know how he's doing it, but he's doing it.
Yeah, I think in many ways it's a little bit of a saving grace for Romero that this isn't a 5-round fight, because I think if it was a 5-round fight, I think Weidman can employ slightly different tactics and drag him into deeper water and maybe look to beat him late on. It's a 3-round fight, so it's a bit more of a sprint. There's always the chance that it might go to decisions. So you can't play about in round 1. You've got to really come out the traps quick. I think it's going to be a fascinating contest. I think it really could go either way. If I was putting money down, I think I'd side with Chris Weidman but it wouldn't surprise me at all to see Romero just completely chuck him around the octagon for 3 minutes and then finish him. It's that sort of fight. It really could go either way, but if you force me, gun to the head, I'll pick Chris Weidman to win that and go on to face Michael Bisping, probably in London, early in 2017. There's a little early prediction for you. There you go.
I like it. That's if Michael Bisping is perhaps still the UFC middleweight champion. And how about that for a segue for you, Si? You want to say that for us?
That's. It's almost like we rehearsed, and believe you me,
if we don't rehearse,
as if we needed that explaining. But yeah. So which moves us on seamlessly to UFC 206, and I use Wikipedia to check up the fight cards and stuff, just because it's easy. The page loads quick and all the rest of it. And the page I'm looking at right now, it's been edited. 2 minutes before we actually hit the airwaves with this podcast, Michael Bisping versus Georges St. Pierre had been added to this fight card in very playful fashion by somebody, and had not done a very good job of it because it broke the table and it looked a mess on the page. Anyway, that's gone now. Daniel Cormier versus Anthony Rumble Johnson is our main event, unless anyone else can tell us different. Max Holloway is going to be in action against Showtime Anthony Pettis, who's had a tricky week this week, having I think it was 3 of his cars were torched on his driveway. Thankfully, no one was hurt. Pettis isn't the sort of guy who strikes me as someone who'd have a lot of enemies, so it's a bit of a weird one. He's not that sort of character, is he?
No, he's not. And I saw both Anthony Pettis and Sergio Pettis' Instagram posts about the situation. And obviously we're a million miles away from where they are in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, but apparently from what I can gather, it's a pretty rough-ish kind of town, city, neighborhood that they live in, and they haven't left that area regardless of how much money they've been able to make in the sport of mixed martial arts. They've kind of stuck to their roots in terms of where they've been brought up and where they've been raised. And obviously, there's lots of pros and cons that come with that, because if you're the person in that rough part of town that's got the nice cars and it's got the money and so forth, and that sometimes breeds jealousy and who knows who did it, but this might be a wake up call. Maybe it's just one of the things where they do need to leave that part of town and move into a more secure and safe neighborhood for the safety of themselves and their family and friends more than anything else. I'm sure these cars, materialistic things can be replaced, and I'm sure there'll be an insurance claim to get that all sorted. But like you said, thankfully nobody was hurt or harmed, and it'll be interesting to see how much of an impact this has on Pettis heading into this fight, which is only about 5 weeks away now. And I'm sure he'll get asked lots of questions about it, and I'm sure it's a bit of a pain to actually go through some of the, I suppose, admin-y things that you've got to do with something like that, with the police and the insurance company, and also the fear of future attacks. Like, do you keep your family and everyone in there? Do you move out? So that's, I'm sure, playing on his mind, and it couldn't have happened in a worse time, because you get a crack at a streaking Max Holloway, a win over him, and boom, you're right in there. Given the fact that you're coming into the featherweight division as a former lightweight champion, you've got that name value, you've headlined pay-per-views, a win over Holloway, and you're right at the top of the list there. So this couldn't have happened at a worse time. But it'll be interesting to see kind of what kind of happens and how that scenario plays out in the next 5 weeks as well.
Yeah, totally agree. And we hope everything gets sorted on that side of things. He's up against it against Max Holloway, notwithstanding outside of the cage distractions. He's got as tough a fight as you could really give him at 145 right now. I mean, Holloway for me is the guy at 145. I think he should be fighting Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo doesn't want to be fighting anybody right now, so it's kind of a tricky one. So I think the winner of this, you have to say, would be the number one contender, given everything that's going on above them in a division. So it's a huge fight for Pettis. It's the fight that Holloway, I think, needs just to completely cement his, and eliminate any doubt as to him being the number one contender. And I think that's going to be a great fight. Valerie Letourneau is in action against Vivian Pereira. Zach McCoskey, John Moraga. Looks like a pretty decent fight on paper at flyweight. Nikita Krylov against Misha Serkinov at light heavy. Makdessi versus Venata could be a bit of a sleeper for fight of the night. I think that might be some fun and games at 155. Chad Laprise, Li Jingyang. My favourite fight on the card, which I don't know if it's confirmed as the Fight Pass featured prelim, but if it isn't, it should be Cub Swanson, Do Ho Choi. That for me, that's almost a co-main event fight. It should be right up there, but the way it's being listed at the moment, it might be a bit further down the card. I'd love to see that fight as the featured prelim or the featured Fight Pass prelim. We've got some other Canadian stars on there. Jason Sago takes on Rustam Habilov, who is probably one of the hardest guys to look good against at lightweight. He's just as tough as they come. Mitch Gagnon against Matthew Lopez, and OAM. It doesn't quite work the same as GSP. Olivier Aubin-Mercier taking on Drew Dober, famous brother-in-law of Nick Hein. If you don't know that story, look that one up. That's a fun story. Drew Dober meeting Nick Hein's sister during fight week when Drew Dober was due to fight Nick Hein. And Nick Hein beat Drew Dober, and Drew Dober started hooking up with Nick Hein's sister, and they're now married. So I don't know who won out of that one.
A beautiful story from the MMA gods.
There you go. It's a fun one. It's a fun one. So there's some good fights on that card. I know it's not superstar stellar laden like it is in UFC 205. It hasn't got that absolute sort of A-list attraction to it that 207 has got. Maybe there's room for another fight or two. Jordan Meehan is due to make his MMA comeback, by the way, as well. He's taking on a very dangerous guy, Emil Weber-Meek. That I don't know if it's been 100% confirmed. It's been reported as being added to the card. So that's at welterweight. So that's a good fight as well. The question, Sandhu, Michael Bisping has been angling for a fight with GSP. It looks like that fight is not happening. He's now mentioned Nick Diaz also for this card. Maybe that fight is doable. Do we want to see Michael Bisping on this card? Does this fight card need Michael Bisping? What will it actually get Michael Bisping? I mean, what are your thoughts on this? He seems to be quite keen to go to Toronto. That seems to be the basic gist of what I can make out. He wants another fight before the end of the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is probably a good point in the show to plug a series of articles on MMA Junkie that I really wish everyone listening and watching will go and read, hopefully, once they've heard about this. So MMA Junkie was able to obtain investor documents from WME IMG and it was presented to them by Zuffa when they were kind of like, getting potential bidders involved in the process. And so this is exclusive to MMA Junkie. They've got these 48 pages, and it's just fascinating to see and read some of the revelations with regards to the income and how the revenue has been split over the last couple of years and where that revenue has come from, how much revenue has been generated. We could do an entire show just on, based on the information. But Ben Folks and Stephen Morocco have kind of teamed up to write a series of articles based on kind of going through this 48-page document, which must have been a task in itself. But I highly recommend go visit MMA Junkie. You'll find it on there. There is one thing that I want to take out of one of the articles that is nicely related to UFC 206, and it's the idea that back in 2014, the UFC decided to change strategy with their pay-per-views and start to what they call quote-unquote double stacking, which basically means you've got your main event slot and then you've got a big co-main event as well. Now, that co-main event could be another title fight, or it could just be two big names. But the idea is you promote them as equally as each other, so that if something happens to your main event or someone falls out and changes, then perhaps that co-main event can just move right on up into that main event slot, and it's still been promoted, pretty heavily. And obviously, this is a good example of what happened, especially after that John Jones UFC 151 situation. But now I take that and I look at UFC 206 and I think to myself, well, okay, you've got Cormier and Johnson in the main event slot. Is Holloway and Pettis really double stacking? I'm not too sure. For a pay-per-view, I'm not sure. A UFC pay-per-view main card slot, absolutely 100%. But then you look at the number of fights that have been so far included for UFC 206, and I'm counting 11. So there's still a couple of slots open for that entire fight card. You look at Michael Bisping, he's been in 3 fights. He was in a war with Dan Henderson. He seems to have healed up like Wolverine. I saw some, if you see some of the interviews he's done this week, it's incredible. We all know that he doesn't need exactly too much notice to come in for a fight. He fought Luke Rockhold on a couple of weeks' notice, no problem. He's very active. He's fought 3 times this year. He wants it. He wants to fight versus Nick Diaz. It's potentially going to, if it happens at UFC 206, it would happen at the same time as the other big middleweight fights with Rockhold and Jacare. And so regardless of what things happen between that fight and the Weidman and Romero fight, all those guys will still need a couple of months to prepare for the next fight anyway. So it's not as if Michael Bisping and Nick Diaz are potentially going to happen in February, which might log down the middleweight division even further until next summer, right? Then I think about Michael Bisping being a champion, and he must be on pay-per-view points. In fact, he said he's on pay-per-view points. Who knows how much UFC 204 did, Si? It was in Manchester. It was late night. It didn't exactly have the super duper big star power that you get with a Rousey or a McGregor or someone of that nature. But Nick Diaz is a proven draw, and to be able to dance with him, he's gonna give you a lot in terms of media traffic. Generate interest. He's been away for a while. He's kind of had the MMA community support, especially going through the whole palaver with the USADA suspension situation where it was 5 years and then they got down to 18 months. Nick Diaz returning to the octagon is a huge story in itself. Daniel Cormier would love for that to happen because he's also on pay-per-view points. So I suppose in regards to cashing in, getting some revenue from the back end of the pay-per-views, and fighting at a time where it won't disrupt too much of the rest of the middleweight pack, it makes sense. Meritocracy-wise, of course it doesn't make sense. Nick Diaz is mostly fought at welterweight. He had that odd fight at middleweight against Anderson Silva, which is obviously now classified as a no contest. What would happen? If Nick Diaz wins the middleweight championship, does that mean he's going to be fighting the winner of Weidman Romero? Does he get a rematch with Michael Bisping? I just don't know what would happen in that particular situation. But I suppose just from a point of view of looking at UFC 206 needing another big fight, it makes total sense.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if they can get him on that card, it's a no-brainer. And there is a bit of moaning about the fact that he wanted to fight GSP and now he wants to fight Nick Diaz. All the other big fights are tied up. Yeah. And as you say, they're in kind of the same time frame. So it's a case of does he want to rest up or does he want to fight? And if he wants to fight, then of course he's going to want to fight the biggest names out there. So, if you look at all the top contenders in that division, all of them have got fights. I think you go down the list, they've all got fights. So obviously he's going to need to look slightly out of left field. GSP, Nick Diaz, either one of them makes complete sense, and it's going to add to the card. So I don't see any problem with the potential of him fighting Nick Diaz or even George St. Pierre. So really, and what it does is it puts him on the same time frame as the other contenders, so that in theory they can then start to position them in the 2017 calendar, knowing that with the medical suspensions and everything, they'll need a certain amount of time, but they'll both be ready at a given time, guaranteed. Do you know what I mean? So I think it makes total sense. And to be honest, the fight card needs it. We've got 11 100% confirmed fights. Jordan Meehan versus Emil Meek would make that 12. But one more, we have seen 13 fight cards in the UFC. So, and I think it needs another one. I think it needs another big one at the top. It really depends on how valuable it is to the UFC to do it. I certainly don't think there's going to be the same issues getting Nick Diaz to sign the deal as it has been trying to get George St. Pierre. Because obviously there's a completely different negotiation process happening with GSP. So I don't think there are too many impediments to Diaz jumping back in there. Once he's cleared by USADA and he's off the Nevada thing. Hasn't he got to pay a fine? Has he had to pay a fine? I don't know if he's done that or not yet.
Well, this is interesting because it's a $75,000 fine he's got to pay Nevada State Athletic Commission. But this fight is taking place in Toronto. Yeah. So I don't know what's going to happen there. I don't know if he's going to perhaps try and get the UFC to pay on his behalf as a way of negotiating to take the Michael Bisping fight. I don't know. But yeah, officially by the rule book, he does owe Nevada $75,000. Within the United States of America, the other kind of athletic commissions do tend to abide by what the other commissions do in terms of rulings. So in the States, in Nevada specifically, he wouldn't be able to fight unless that fine would be paid. So it'd be interesting to see, if he ends up on this Toronto, what actually is the end scenario with that situation.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe
another fascinating wrinkle to the Nick Diaz story.
As if we needed more of those. But yeah, I just as a side note, it'd just be good to see him back in there again. I think, his absence has almost given Nate the chance to shine, and that's been great for him. But Nick is a superstar in his own right, and of course he's a former world champion, so it'd be great to see him back in there.
Bit of a nice little stat. It's just been, as it is Halloween weekend, 5 years ago, this weekend was when Nick Diaz last won a fight in the UFC, and I was there for that one. That's UFC 137. He beat BJ Penn, which kind of makes the whole idea of him getting a title shot against Michael Bisping, the UFC middleweight champion. That's where I can see the uproar from parts of the community where this guy's coming in of a massive suspension. He hasn't even won a fight in the UFC in 5 years, and all of a sudden you're giving him a UFC middleweight title shot. That makes zero sense. But it makes sense and it makes dollars, so that's why it makes sense.
Yeah, here's the thing, right? And it's the same with the Conor McGregor situation right now, him fighting Eddie Alvarez. I think these fights, while if you look at the situations in isolation, they don't make a hell of a lot of sense. It's like you got a featherweight champion fighting for the lightweight title and not defending his belt, and then you got this potential situation where a guy who hasn't won a fight in how many 5 years was it you just said? Yeah, jumping in and potentially fighting for the UFC middleweight title. Again, in isolation, it looks ridiculous. But you step back and look at the bigger picture a little bit. What does it do? The McGregor fight then hits the reset button, hopefully, on the featherweight division and the lightweight division. There will be an undisputed champion in the lightweight division by the end of this fight. And McGregor will either be that man or he's going to have to make a decision on dropping back down. but he's not going to hold both belts. That immediately wakes up the featherweight division again. So that's that. So you're sort of hitting the reset button on that. What you're doing with Bisping, if Bisping fights at 206, it doesn't damage anything. All it does is it extends the Michael Bisping story. If Michael Bisping beats Nick Diaz, that's another MMA legend on his record. That just makes him even more, it's another chapter to his story when you then sell his next fight against Chris Weidman, Luke Rockhold, Yoel Romero, or Jacare. So it actually benefits them as well. So there's that. Obviously, if Nick Diaz wins, then all the chips go up in the air and everything completely changes. But everything moves on but having beaten Bisping, he's then on the same time frame as the other contenders in the division. It allows that division, which has had a bit of a logjam itself, to then move on at the appropriate pace. So looking at them individually, you can kind of see why people are a little bit up in arms about it. Take a step back and look at the bigger picture and say, okay, how are these fights going to help things 6 to 12 months down the line? Hopefully it puts things into alignment again, and then what you hopefully will have is a situation where you've got weight divisions that are progressing properly with the appropriate guys getting the title shots. And if you have to have a couple of these slightly left field matchups in order to get to that point, so be it. There'll be fun fights to watch. So I'm looking forward to the potential of Bisping fighting Diaz. GSP would have been just a ridiculous fight. I would have loved to see that. But it doesn't look like we're going to get that now. So we'll have to see.
I've got a feeling when we're in New York, or by the time we're in New York, Simon, I think we will either have been given the announcement that this fight's taking place. I've got a gut feeling that this is a fight that's going to happen. I don't know why. I just see Michael Bisping going through the Fox Sports car wash of all the different outlets talking about Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz will be in New York next week. He's scheduled to do a few kind of fan appearances with Joe Schilling and Nate Diaz.
As will Bisping, by the way.
As will Bisping. So
he's going to be there with the Fox team. So
yeah, well, there you go. New York, media capital of the world. You're going to have the world's MMA media, the indigenous media. You're going to have mainstream media there. That will be a nice moment to announce the fight and then get all this media attention to then build on to UFC 206. Because listen, things don't stop with UFC 205. There's always the next one, and then the next one, and then the next one. So to take advantage of Fight Week in New York and the media opportunities, I think when we're there, I think they're going to announce it.
Yeah, and just a little side note, and it's just occurred to me. If Conor McGregor wins against Eddie Alvarez, and if Michael Bisping fights Nick Diaz, and Nick Diaz wins, given that the final pay-per-view of 2016 will be UFC 207, and the amount of turnaround time you could be looking at, we could potentially see UFC 209 featuring Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor 3 for the lightweight championship of the world, and Nick Diaz defending the UFC middleweight championship of the world. How batshit mental would that be?
That would be pretty crazy. And if you want to just throw in the ultimate scenario, if it was, we're getting crazy, we're getting into crazy territory. I feel like we've taken some MMA mushrooms now, just talking about this stuff.
It's been a long time since we've seen some live fights, Sandhu.
Yeah, I know. We're clacking. But if you had a situation where it's McGregor, Nate Diaz, and then how about Diaz, middleweight champion of the world, defending against George St. Pierre, his old rival, and a rematch he's been wanting for ages. And you'd have the Diaz brothers, McGregor, and GSP all in the mix to co-headline UFC 209, which just as a number itself is just like, when you talk about numbers, just ask John Anik what that means, you know what I mean? It's one of the most kind of iconic numbers within the world of MMA that we live in, so... But it's been a few weeks since we last watched any UFC action. So yeah, it's been a while.
We've all gone a little bit crazy. I can only apologise. And on that note, we should probably return to reality. And what better way than to answer some of your questions? I understand you've got a few questions that we can address this week. It's we're getting back into the fights again. So hopefully Any of you guys out there, if you've got any questions that arise from the fights this weekend, or any questions that you want us to address about 205, 206, 207, any more crackpot theories about UFC 209, whatever you want, we can't always promise to be right, but we will at least give you an opinion. So
we'll speculate. There you go. We'll speculate and give you an opinion.
At the Britpack MMA on Twitter is the place to send your questions. You can copy us in at Sandhu MMA, at Simon Head, and we will make sure that we gather together the great and the good from the questions that come in, and we will do our best to answer them each week on the show. Mr. Sandhu, I will hand over the reins to you, my good man.
Absolutely. Well, again, thanks everyone for tweeting us your questions. Remember, if you want to get your questions read out on the show, you have to copy in the Britpack MMA handle. That is the feed that I'm looking at when I'm reading these questions out. So the first question is from Andrew Sordi, which is a weird surname, Andrew, but I appreciate it nonetheless. Do you really want to see Bisping at 206? I hope he waits for Weidman / Romero / Jacare / Rockall. I mean, we've just come off a whole segment talking about this, but I can see Andrew's point of view here. He's in that kind of, I'm not going to say minority, but definitely in the section of the MMA community that believes in the meritocracy, that believes in fighters earning title shots and champions defending against the right opponent. So I can appreciate what you're saying there, Andrew. I suppose from a personal point of view, it's I don't know about you, Si, but it's always an ongoing conflict that I have internally in regards to. A part of me agrees with what Andrew's saying here. I want to see the best fight the best, and title shots and opportunities earned, and champions fighting the next challenger, so to speak, in the pecking order. At the same time, though, there is also a part of me that just wants to see the biggest fights possible, the biggest names fighting each other, because from, again, a media perspective, angles, storylines, build up, hype, promotion. I love that part of the sport. I love that part of the business. When you get polarizing figures like Nick Diaz and Michael Bisping, who have a long history in the sport and a long history in the UFC as well, when else are you going to see fighters like that, potentially fight each other? These opportunities, come around once in a blue moon. So I can appreciate what Andrew's saying here, but again, sorry, that's just me having an internal conflict all the time. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I put myself in the same boat as Andrew, to be honest, in as much as I want the sport to be a meritocracy first. I think the championship belts need to mean something. If you've got a UFC championship belt, it needs to mean that you are the best in the world in your weight class. And I think you need to earn it, and to win, you need to beat the best guy. And Michael Bisping beat the best guy. He beat the champion of the world. He knocked him out. So he's a legit champion. I know people aren't happy necessarily with that because not everyone likes Michael Bisping. He beat the champion and he beat him decisively. Everyone likes to tell everyone how good Luke Rockhold is, and he is. He's brilliant. He got knocked out in 3.5 minutes by Michael Bisping. It's fact. UFC 199. So you're now in a situation where he needs to defend his belt. Fine. Can he defend his belt against a top contender? Well, he can't at the moment because they're all tied up. So he has the option. Does he sit out? Or does he want to give the fans effectively and himself a bonus fight? Have an extra fight. He's prepared to put his title on the line against someone who not necessarily is a top contender in terms of the rankings. Nick Diaz is a former world champion. It's not like he's fighting the cleaning lady here. He's fighting a good guy if he fights Nick Diaz. So I don't have a problem with it. I think if it comes at the expense of a legit title fight, then I've got an issue with it. And that's why I think the Conor McGregor situation is a little different. But in terms of this one, and he's not missing out on these other fights. If he fights at the same sort of time as Romero and Jacare and all these guys, then he's going to come out of it the other side in exactly the same state as all these other guys. So he'll be on the same time frame. I don't think it's a problem if he fights. I think as long as he's in a position to defend against the winner, the most impressive winner, got no problem with it. Get him in there. If he wants to sit and wait, fine. Then he gets the win. He gets the most impressive winner. Either way, he'll fight the most impressive winner. So I don't think we've got a problem. I think it's all good.
Sounds good. RG tweets in and says, with Alexa Grasso who we spoke about briefly earlier on, set for a UFC debut. How far do you think she can go in the strawweight division? You can tackle that one first, Si.
I've not seen too many of her fights, but what I have seen of her is she's good. She's good, but what we haven't seen is how she's going to do against the likes of a Joanna Jacek, against a Rose Namajunas, against a Karolina Kowalkiewicz. You know, so she's very talented. She's undefeated, so she's coming in, and I think the time is right for her. And I think Heather Jo Clark she's fighting. I think this weekend. Is that right?
Yep.
So I think that's a good introductory fight for her. Heather Jo is very tough. Has been in there. She was on that Ultimate Fighter season. And I think if Alexa Grasso gets past Heather Jo Clark, then you could maybe see her against like a Felice Herrig or someone like that, and then move her up a little bit further. I mean, potentially she could face someone like Paige Van Zandt further down the line and just move her way up the ladder. But I think she's very talented. She's young. She's only 23 years of age, so there's no immediate rush to sling her in at championship level at this point. And I'm excited to see what the ceiling is for her, because I think from the strawweight division, obviously it's the newest division in the UFC, but for me it's one of the most exciting as well. So I'm looking forward to it. More top draw fighters moving into that division, the better. And undefeated prospect from Mexico as well, which has all sorts of marketing connotations for the UFC if she starts winning fights. I'm looking forward to it. It should be a fun fight with Heather Jo Clark on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you, so I haven't really seen too much of her. I mean, in terms of what the stats tell us, she's 8-0 with 4 decisions and 4 knockout victories. Her last 4 fights have been in Invicta FC, which has basically become like a nice little feeder system for the UFC 135 and 115 weight classes. But even if I had seen her fight before, I always am of the opinion it doesn't matter where you come from, where you fought before. When you fight in the UFC, there is a bit of it's something that you need to overcome to get through that first walkout, to experience a UFC fight week. There's more media exposure, there's more media requests. It's all new. It can be overwhelming. How do you deal with the mental side of fight week? How do you deal with perhaps the largest arena you've ever fought in front of more people than you've ever fought in front of before? That's a big spotlight when you fight in the UFC, the biggest promotion in the world. So that's a major factor, especially making your debut when you're coming in with hype, and there's a lot of people talking about your potential. So for me, I always like to take a backseat when fighters are making their debut and trying not to get too caught up in the pre-fight talk and the build-up and the promotion and the stories, and rather just let them perform once or twice, see how they do before I make a more kind of informed decision in regards to my opinion of that particular fighter. But with regards to everything that you mentioned, Simon, a fantastic prospect. I read an interview on MMA Fighting actually earlier today where she kind of openly said she's a massive fan of Joanna Jędrzejczyk, especially her striking. It's something that she wants to emulate. So obviously got tons of respect for the woman who's at the top of that particular weight class. Going on to the next tweet coming in from John Todd. He says, what do you think the UFC looks like today if RDA didn't pull out of UFC 196? How different would it be now for Conor, Diaz, Aldo, and others? And that's an interesting question, because had RDA not pulled out, well, what if Conor had already beaten him and was already a 2-weight champion? That alone, I suppose, would have been so historic. That would have been, I suppose, the storyline pegging him on to bigger and better things in terms of pay-per-view numbers. I still think, regardless of what happened in that situation, which ended up being this big Diaz storyline of 2016 for McGregor, which obviously broke pay-per-view records, his number and his star was still rising, regardless of the Diaz situation. Now, maybe it spiked much higher than anyone would have thought with that situation with Nate Diaz, and obviously they've definitely been riding that ever since. But I think that perhaps we may have seen, again, all speculative, had McGregor beaten RDA and RDA not pulled out due to injury, perhaps could we have seen him drop back down one more time to featherweight and fight Jose Aldo at UFC 200? Who knows? But again, if we're going to go into the DeLorean here, Simon, and we're going back to events before UFC 196. What about you? If RDA doesn't pull out of that fight, how do you think that fight goes with McGregor at that particular moment in time? And do you think it would have had a different impact on how things have panned out for Conor, Diaz, and Aldo?
Absolutely, it would have made a difference, because I think, win or lose, we would have had a winner in that fight. So, and I think if McGregor had won, he would have reached his goal of becoming a two-weight world champion. And I think the decision over what to do with the two belts will have been made by now. So I think the divisions would be more settled today than they are right now because of that. Because I think we're just a few months behind what should have been the case. This should have happened earlier in the year. RDA's broken/bruised foot was the reason that's what derailed everything. That was the sliding doors moment that completely changed history, right? So, and now what you've got, the biggest loser in this. If you got in your DeLorean and went back in time, or you jumped into the body of Sam Beckett and went back quantum leap style, and somehow that fight happened, the biggest loser would be Nate Diaz, because those fights wouldn't have happened, and Nate Diaz would probably still have been sort of a maverick cult hero without being the big superstar that he has now become. In terms of McGregor, it may well have been that he would have beaten RDA. So if we go down the route of him having beaten RDA, the whole mystique of Conor McGregor would be different as well, because I think one of the things that has made McGregor arguably even bigger now is the fact that he is considered vulnerable. The fact that he lost, in some ways, I think, has made him even bigger. Because if you've got an all-conquering dominant champion, a la Ronda Rousey, everyone tunes in because they're waiting to watch the champion win. Other people are getting a bit bored with that, but the fans will stay in and tune in to watch him win. Conor McGregor he's always been saddled with this thing where he hasn't fought the best guys, or he hasn't fought an elite wrestler, but then he fought Chad Mendes and beat him. But then there was the excuse of Mendes was on a short camp. There was always a caveat. Anyone who wanted to slag off McGregor always had something to cling on to. Then he lost to Diaz. And at which point, that really did throw everything up in the air. But then he came back and beat Diaz. And at that point, McGregor went from being a superstar to being a megastar. And at that point, for my money, he became bigger than Ronda Rousey in terms of the sport of mixed martial arts. Or in terms of sport, I think he became a bigger star. He certainly earns more money at the box office than Ronda ever earned. And it'd be interesting to see what kind of numbers Ronda pulls, although she's on a Friday night card on December the 30th. That's not ideal for her in terms of pulling numbers. But yeah, I think McGregor now is the biggest star in the UFC, even if Ronda comes back. And had he fought and beaten dos Anjos, he'd be the biggest star in the UFC now. But I think the whole mystique around him would be a completely different feel. And I think, actually, if you're the UFC and you go back and you look at the way it worked out, you couldn't have had it work out better. I really don't. There's a few little things to smooth out with the featherweight division and all the rest of it. That's all going to be done. By the end of this year, all family business will be attended to, and we will kick off into 2017. Every weight division sorted, and hopefully Ronda Rousey back in the fold, Conor McGregor in charge of one division at the very least. So I think it's interesting, but I think it's worked out for the best. I really do.
And that is a wrap for questions, Simon, which basically means all roads lead to New York City.
They do, mate. They do. I've never been to New York City. Anyone who's been to New York City, you got any recommendations? Where can we get a good dollar pizza near Madison Square Garden? Let me know. Any good places to go for a cold beer after we've finished our work? That would always be good to know as well. Yeah, it's gonna be fun. As I say, I've been to America a few times, but I went to LA once, and the rest of the time it's just been Vegas. So my actual touristy hat is going to come out for this one, and I'm going to try and get about the city and check out some of the sights and sounds of New York. It should be good fun. And then,
of course, I can't wait.
And then,
it's going to be amazing.
And then we've got the biggest fight card in UFC history on the Saturday night. It's going to be amazing. Get your questions in nice and early. We haven't completely decided on how we're going to how we're going to do the show after 205. I expect we will do something out there.
We'll figure it out.
Press room maybe or something like that. But you can guarantee we'll be doing something special for that, and it should be good fun. And fingers crossed we'll have something for Belfast as well. But we've got a few little wrinkles that need ironing out first. But fingers crossed we'll be able to do something fun for that as well. Follow Sandhu at Sandhu MMA. Follow me at Simon Head. And follow the show at the Brit Pack MMA. You can subscribe, rate and review us at iTunes. You can subscribe via Acast, and you can subscribe via Stitcher. Go to soundcloud.com/thebritpack to listen straight from the browser, and also get links to everywhere else, all of the places you can subscribe. The next show we will be doing from New York City. It will be Fight Week, and myself and Mr. Sandhu will find an appropriate location to record the next edition of the Brit Pack, as we give you the essential preview of UFC 205, as we do every week, with a distinctly British flavour. That was episode 15 of the Brit Pack. Thank you so much for listening. Enjoy the fights this weekend, and we'll speak to you from New York City next week.